Okay, so I guess we can start now. Welcome everybody to Journal Publication Seminar, Your Manuscript Destiny. So if you have a manuscript ready, this is the session for you to listen to our distinguished speaker, Professor Gustaf Olsson, Professor Emeritus from Lund University, Sweden, and also honorary degree of Doctor Engineering recipient of University Technology Malaysia back in 2012. For your kind information, we have the pleasure of hosting Gustaf today, together with me, my sensei, Professor Rijal, from Tokyo City University at Yokohama campus. I'll be very quick. We have at the moment, I think, 45 participants online, and we have a classroom of students here in Yokohama campus, and I would like to thank professors who are also joining today. We have here with us Dr. Rila from Setagaya campus. Over on Zoom, we have Professor Niza Sarmin, Madam Punita, Professor Hazarina, and some friends. I can't see everybody on my screen because obviously I'm speaking. So the agenda for today, at 2:30, we shall begin the publication seminar with Gustaf. We have 6 lectures altogether, lecture 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and each lecture shall come with a 5 minutes break. So we just follow Gustaf and we see how the rhythm of the seminar today. You are allowed to ask questions throughout the session, encouraging interactive session with Gustaf. So feel free to raise your hand or switch on your mic if you are talking via Zoom to ask Gustaf question directly. For your kind information, this session is recorded and it will be disseminated for future reference and broader accessibility to all other participants who are not able to join today. We have a special Q&A session at the end, approximately at 5:30 until 6:15. And you are encouraged to also note down if you have longer question to keep it at the end of the session. If you have any questions, please also feel free to note down your question in the chat box. Let me quickly introduce Gustaf, our speaker for today. He is a professor in industrial automation, and since 2006, he has been appointed as professor emeritus at Lund University, Sweden. He has devoted his research to control and automation of urban water systems, power production, electrical power systems, and industrial processes. Since his retirement, he has focused on interactions between water, energy, climate change, food economy, and lifestyle. For more than a decade, he has served as part-time guest professor at Tsinghua University in Beijing and University Technology Malaysia. He has been the editor-in-chief of Water Science and Technology and an International Water Association board member. Back in 2010, he received the IWA Publication Award. In 2012, he was the awardee of an honorary membership of the IWA, as well as honorary doctor degree at University Technology Malaysia. In 2004, he was appointed a distinguished fellow of the IWA, and in the last decade, he has been mentoring IWA young water professionals from all continents. Gustaf has authored 14 books, some of them translated into Russian, German, Korean, Persian, and Chinese. And he has chapters in 22 books and over 200 scientific papers. 4 books he's published by IWA Publications are now available as open access. His latest book on water interactions, A Systemic View, Why We Need to Comprehend the Water, Climate, Energy, Food Economy, Lifestyle Nexus, was published in 2022. So ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, without further ado, let us welcome our distinguished speaker for today, Gustaf Olsson. Over to you, Gustaf.
Well, thank you very much, Hayati, for welcome. It's really my honor and pleasure to be together with you this, well, morning here and afternoon for you. And I would like to share some of my experiences in writing scientific papers. And I do hope that you will be able to find some useful material in here. And let me already now say that, if you have questions after the seminar today, don't hesitate to write me a letter and ask question, or we can discuss, various possibilities, because I'm very happy to correspond with you all. And also, of course, I'm grateful to be able to join you in this way. And I have so many positive experiences, both from Yokohama and Tokyo and Kuala Lumpur and Johor Bahru in Malaysia. And it's a true pleasure to be together with you in this way. Let me now share my screen, and I will make sure that you can see now. Can you see my picture now? Yeah, good, very good. So what I'm going to do now is to, let's say, condense a course that I usually have had in 4 days. And now the 4 days will be condensed into 3 hours. So bear with me that it's, of course, a lot of material in here, but I hope that some of it can be useful for you anyhow. And as Norhayati said, don't hesitate to raise your hand while I'm lecturing, because then I know you're awake too during the lecture. And also afterwards, you might have longer questions at the end of the session today. So what I wish to do now in the first lecture is to introduce the course, show the goals, and why should you publish at all? Why is it so useful and necessary? And I will talk about communication, because publishing is all about communication with, and the problem is who, with whom. So remember that you might have a lot of things to tell, and you are eager to tell everything that you have done. But the point is the reader ready to read all that you have written? What is the reader interested in? And very often I've met people, they are writing a long, long article because they would like to tell everything that they've done. But everybody's not interested to read everything that you did. So what is your key message? And this is what I'm trying now to describe during the lectures today. And the goal of the course or the seminar today is to say, okay, why do we publish? What motivates us to do that? And the point is that we start with a project or with a problem that we would like to solve and attack. And how do we go there from problem characterization to publication? And of course, what is interesting now is when you submit a paper to a journal, is this what is interesting for other scientists? How can I make sure that my paper, my publication, or my notes about my research is getting interesting for somebody else? So the point is, how do we formulate our message in writing? And I will also say some words about presenting at a workshop or presenting at a conference. The other goal is, of course, who is the reader? Because very often we don't think about that. Is the reader a very specialized scientist? Is it a practicing engineer? Or who is he or she? So you have to make sure from the very beginning, what is my audience? And that will determine how you communicate your message. Because if you turn towards a narrow specialist, you don't need to explain everything because they already know. But if you're turning towards a practicing engineer, you really have to tell, why am I doing this? Why is this interesting for a practicing engineer? So this has to all the time penetrate your thinking when you think about writing your message. And the point is that the same project can be written in two completely different ways. One for the specialist, another one for the practitioner. Again, think about the reader. So we'll talk about how to write a scientific paper, how to publishing, and to present the results. So that's the goal of today's seminar. If you think about, when you see a journal table of content, or if you see something getting announced on the web or wherever it is, what will catch your attention? And when you see a table of content in a journal, you don't read every paper. Something catches your attention. And you look at the title, you might look at the introduction a little bit. Is this interesting for me? Well, if you have seen the introduction, the first paragraph, well, this may be interesting for me. So you look into the abstract. And what did they find out? You read the conclusion. Unless this has caught your interest, you just skip the paper and go to the next one. In other words, when you write the paper, these parts may be the most important ones. How you write the title, how you write the introduction, how you write the abstract, and you make your conclusions. Because if they are not able to catch the attention, people don't care about the materials and methods and the results and the tables and the figures and so on and so forth. So these four things are the ones that really make people continue looking at the details in your paper. So in other words, you have to catch the attention. Because remember, there's only one or two people that really have to read your paper. That's your supervisor and the co-supervisor. They have to read it. But otherwise, everybody else is doing that voluntarily. So in order to make people read your paper voluntarily, how can I catch their attention? That's the point in everything that you write and submit for a journal. And then, of course, how we present the results. Of course, now we are coming to the next one. Once you have caught the attention, then you can look at the materials methods and, you have to be clear about the experiments and the models and the simulations. You have to have nice figures and tables and so on and so forth. That's the next phase. But unless you have caught the attention, people will never come to this point. And of course, finally, the discussion. And this is something that people all very often forget about. Actually, there may be people, they've worked for years and years in the laboratory, and they've collected a lot of material, and they just present the material. And that doesn't make the paper scientific. It's a good engineering work if you collect all the material from experiments and simulations and so on, but not until you discuss the results. And is this what you expected? Does this make me surprised? And so on. You critically take 2 steps back, look at the results. What is interesting now? What is really a contribution in all of this? And remember, the discussion is what makes the paper scientific. I've seen several papers, being submitted, and they've done a phenomenal work in experiments and so on. But it didn't get accepted as a scientific paper because they never discussed the results. They just presented the results. And that's a good engineering work, but not scientific. So remember this. And finally, we'll talk about the conclusions. So we have these 3 parts: catch the attention, then, of course, present the results very carefully, and then finally discuss and explain. Is this what I expected? Did it make me surprised? And so on and so forth. So in the course of seminar now, we'll talk about writing, why we publish, communicate. I'll talk about language and style a little bit, and also writing the paper, one part at a time, all the way from the title and abstract down to the references. And then I'll comment a little bit about publishing. what does the editor look at? Because now I've had the pleasure, or it's not always a pleasure to be at both sides of the table, both as an editor, accepting or rejecting papers, and of course trying to get my papers published. So I know the arguments on both sides. So I'll try to mention a little bit about the editor's view, and then, of course, looking at, okay, what are the rules, ethical rules, journals, how do they measure it in terms of bibliometric measures? In other words, impact factor, H index, and so on. I'll explain a little bit about that. And then you submit the paper and you present the paper. So this is the content of what I'm trying to say today. And of course, it's very condensed, and I hope you can bear with me about that. So why do we publish at all? And this is the quality test, what I'm doing. Because if I manage to get my work published, that means that somebody has recognized this is worthwhile to share with the scientific community. And this is a life condition for any scientific work. It's a condition for open research. You have to really openly show what you have done, and you have to discuss that. And other researchers now have the chance to communicate with you about this. Well, the point is you will get known when you publish, and you meet other researchers, you can compare results. Because before you have published, well, people around you in your neighborhood know you. But in the scientific community, they will know you by your name, by the paper that you have published. And the point is that we exchange knowledge. We don't buy knowledge. Because when I present what I've done, I can exchange my ideas with somebody else. And suddenly you create a network of people working in your field. And they can come from any part in the world. And that's the fantastic of being, in science, because you have friends and colleagues all over the world, because you exchange ideas and you're curious about your results and so on, and you build up that kind of network. And the interesting thing is that network of colleagues, after some time, become a network of friends. And that's the fantastic of being in academia. You have a big network, not only of colleagues, but also of really personal friends. Well, the point is that if you don't publish, well, your work doesn't exist, because this is the way to spread the word. And also, when you publish, anybody can find it. If you have it only in a sort of internal report, only your closest colleagues will know what you've been doing. And for good or for bad, but most academic people are evaluated based on their publications. Well, then we may discuss, the value system that we have to evaluate people. That's another story, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on in various publication measures. Because these days, there are so many bureaucrats, they would like to evaluate you with just one number. And they don't see the value of, various aspects of your system. So I'm also critical about some of the evaluation system, but that's another story. I'll tell a little bit more about later on. But the point is, when you publish, you get known, and you get colleagues, and you get friends. That's the point. So the first thing you have to do when you think about writing a paper, who is the potential reader? Is it now a specialist? Is it practicing engineer? Or is it a water specialist? Or is it an energy specialist? Or who is it? Because that will determine what I have to explain. Because if you try to publish your paper to somebody, you have to explain the reason for this research, where are we today, where is the research once my publication has been published. So it's very important that you think from the very beginning, because this determines how you introduce the whole paper. So what is your key message? Well, try to do this. You describe in 1 or 2 minutes for your friend, not the closest colleagues, because they already know what your key message is, but for your wife, your husband, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your grandmother, whatever. What am I trying to do? And this is very important to say it in just 1 minute or 2 minutes, because then you have to practice. What is really my message? Well, I'll tell you, I practice this. I have a very patient wife, Kirsti, and she is a medical nurse. So she's not an engineer. And, at the kitchen table, I try to explain for her what I'm thinking. And she asked me regularly, why do you think so? Why do you think so? And I try to understand what I'm saying. And finally, I think I understand what I'm saying. So, tell for somebody who is not a specialist, what is the message of what you're doing and why are you doing it? And this should be in the very beginning of your paper. Why are we writing this paper? What is the problem? This is often very much overlooked by many authors. So what is your vision? Why do we write all this? So think about it very often, because so many people don't emphasize on the why, they emphasize on the how. How did I do it? But it's very important that you from the very beginning explain, this is why we do this kind of research. And then you think, okay, now you read a paper and you do that voluntarily. Nobody forces you to read a paper unless you have a terrible supervisor that forces you to do that. But let's forget about that. What makes you read the paper? Well, you look at the title. Does the title catches your interest? And if it doesn't, you skip it and you go to the next one. So think about it. The title is extremely important. And I'll come back to that in a little while. Then you may read the abstract. What is the message? Is this interesting for me or not? In other words, and you might flip, looking a little bit at the figures. Is there any figure that catches your interest and so on and so forth? But you read the introduction. Why did they do this work? Why is it important? And before you look at the how they did it, what is the motivation for that work? What was the knowledge before the paper and after the paper? And then you might quickly look at the figures. Do they tell any story to you? And then conclusions. And remember, conclusions is a very short message. A conclusion doesn't have any explanations. Well, very often, let's say in industry, you show a report to the manager, and the manager doesn't have time to read everything. The manager will read, okay, now you got so and so many yen or dollars or whatever it is to do this work. What did you find out? And he or she will read, okay, the first part of the introduction. What was the purpose of the work? And then they read the conclusion. What did you find out? Was it worth the money? In other words, that's very often what the manager only reads. In the scientific community, it's a similar thing. When you decide if you're interested to read that paper, you read the title and the conclusions and what did they find out. And if that catches your interest, you may go into the details of the paper. So think about that, how you try to read a paper. when you write it, your potential reader is behaving like this. So after the first glance, do you wish to continue? In other words, so you might have spent a lot of time to materials and methods and figures and tables and so on. But if people are not interested in the first parts, you will never show it. So make an exercise. Try to present your research in 2 minutes for a colleague, not the closest colleague, but for somebody else, or your friend or family member. What am I doing and why? No slides, just explain in 2 minutes. And that's a very useful exercise. And the first time it will take you 4 or 5 minutes. And then you say, okay, you use a timer and see, okay, you have to go down to 2 minutes. Because then you have to practice saying, this is really the essence of what I'm doing. So in the first times, you might get a little bit disappointed because you don't manage to explain it. But try once more, once more, once more. It's very often a matter of practice. The point is, I will come back to this later on when we talk about presentations, because it's the same thing. In the beginning, you might have 15 minutes to present the work that you did for one full year, and you say it's impossible. Yes, it's impossible the first time, but you practice and practice and practice until you can say, what is the key message? I'll tell you a story. I've had quite a few master students and, of course, PhD students. And the master students, they had to have a seminar at the end of the work, 30 minutes. And I said, okay, no more than 30 minutes. And I told the guy, not 20 minutes, 30 minutes. You have to keep it. And one guy, he was speaking the introduction for 20 minutes. And then I said, okay, now you have 10 minutes left. Oh, it's impossible, he said. No, no, you have 30 minutes, I said. And after 29 minutes, I said, now you have 1 minute left. And he had just, came out from the introduction. And after 30 minutes, I left because I simply had to leave. And the guy was really desperate because he had only presented half of his work. The point is that now he had to make the same presentation at an industry that we have been cooperating with. And when we came to the industry, he had 30 minutes sharp, a very good presentation. So, it's a matter of practice. You can do it if you really think that you have to do that. So think about the 2 minute exercise. Well, with that, I'll skip. Let's make now a 5 minute break. But before that, is there any question from anybody of you? Please don't hesitate to raise your hand or ask questions. No question?
Any question from Zoom viewers before we go for a 5 minute break?
Okay, then we go for 5 minute break and start lecture two then.
Yes, we'll come back
Okay.
at 3 o'clock, at 2:50, around 2:55, around 2:50.
55. Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Gustaf.
Perfect. Thank you.
Please enjoy your coffee, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, Gustaf. Anytime you're ready,
Okay.
Gustaf.
I'm
Hi.
ready.
Yes, anytime. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, if you have any question, please do type in your questions in the chat box, or you can feel free to ask Gustav directly. Okay, don't be shy. He's speaking from far away in Sweden. So please take this opportunity to ask your question. Thank you.
And let me also add, Norhayati, that I will send a PDF copy of the slides to you. So anybody who is interested can have the slides available if they don't wish to listen to all the recordings. So that can be a possibility as well. So I'll make sure that you get them and have them available. So now I'll talk about the title and the abstract. And very often people spend very little time on formulating the title. And actually, the title is extremely important. And you should spend a long time and don't accept the first attempt. You have to change it, you have to rewrite it, you have to test it with colleagues and so on and so forth, because the title is the entry point to the paper. And many people forget about that. So I'll talk about the title and what to think about, and also abstract and keywords. So think about this again. Write down the central message, the 3 central points, or 2, whatever, of your paper, and summarize your paper in 1 sentence. Just a regular language to show what am I trying to say with this article. And that's a sentence that you show only maybe for yourself or your closest friend, but trying to say, this is the message I have, and describe the work to a colleague, again, in 1 minute, because this is something that helps you to clarify your own thoughts. And many people forget about that, and you just try to not explain for anybody else. But the point is, when you write your paper, you explain for your reader. Before you do that, explain it in words for yourself. Talk loudly, even if you are alone. Talk loudly. What am I trying to say? Because that will help you when you later on write the title, when you write the introduction, and so on. So spend time on it, because it will pay off. I had a course like this spread out in 4 days. And people thought, okay, what can we do in 4 days? And people were actually very busy with all the content that we are talking about now in 3 hours. They had it for 4 days, trying to apply the ideas on their own paper. We talked about titles. How long time did you have to spend for the title? Actually, a group of 3 people, they were working with titles of their own papers. And after 3 hours, they said, oh, we are not finished yet. We have to work more on the title. So you can see it's worthwhile to spend time on it, what I'm trying to say. This is something I would like to emphasize for you. You should write something every day, even if it's only 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes, because many people, they do a lot of work for months in simulation, modeling work, or experiments, and so on. And after half a year or a year, they said, okay, now we have to start documenting all of this. And it's becoming so much more dramatic when you start doing like this. Well, I'll tell you the way I work myself, because I'm still trying to keep alert and writing. So every day there is something coming up, and I look for that article, whatever it is, and I say, okay, write down in 10 minutes, copy some sentences in that article, write down the reference and what I thought about it. Only 10 minutes. And that will help you to collect ideas when you write a paper or a book or whatever it is, because you collect ideas from all over the place. And the way you write an article is not, linearly. You start with the introduction and write materials and methods and finally conclusion. You jump between different parts of it. And when you write something every day, it doesn't have to be a good language. Just write it down so you self understand what you have done. That takes away some of the dramatic aspects of writing a paper or writing a PhD report or whatever it is. So think about it. Spend 10 or 15 minutes every day on writing, because that will help you a lot in the later part of the work. So don't worry about language. Just write down what you think in your own language. It can be a spoken language, and it can be in your home tongue. It doesn't have to be in English, for example, but just write down the idea you got just now, because 1 week or 1 month later, you might have forgotten what you thought about it. And when you see a reference, write it down in a format that can be just copied later on in your paper or in your PhD thesis or whatever it is. Write down the reference directly while you think about it, while you remember what was written in it. And then you write 2 or 3 lines about, oh, this is what really caught my attention about that reference. So do that, something every day, every day. And write when your energy is high. I myself, I'm more alert in the morning than in the evening, so it's better to spend some time in the morning. Some other people are the other way around, but just think about it when your energy is high. Well, when you're tired, you can, polish, or check if I wrote down the reference in the right way, or edit the figure or something like that. But when your energy is high, then you should formulate yourself and really do something that helps you to make progress in the paper. So, as I said, when you have seen a reference, write down the reference and your impression of the paper, and it's relevant for your own work. This was a good remember. Please remember that. Or I saw this reference, but maybe it's not really relevant for my work, but I keep it anyhow so that I don't forget about it. So you have a list of references where you have already put some kind of value, your personal value, to that reference, and that helps you later on in the process. And when you write, don't worry about the words. Just, as if you talk with your friend, this is what I would like to write down. And the point is now, when we have, all tools in word processing and so on and so forth, you know, I tell the way I write a book, for example, I don't start with chapter 1. I may start with chapter 6 because I found something. And then the next day, I find some information that helps me for chapter 4. So you collect pieces, almost randomly from the beginning, idea here and an idea there. And then I collected a number of ideas for chapter 4. Then I'm getting ready to write now more in a more systematic way. And very often in our research, we can do the same. You randomly pick up ideas that you get, and you don't know how they fit in the final paper, but somewhere you have collected ideas. So write it down in your own home tongue, whatever, and in your own way, because now it's not the time to make it the perfect language. Just use it so you don't forget about it. And in other words, you write the paper in parts. You don't attempt to start with the abstract introduction and finally the conclusions. You randomly put in, it's like putting a puzzle together. So think like that, because now we have a chance to edit with all our tools for word processing. And remember, writing is a matter of practice. And I can confess, many years ago when I started, I didn't like writing at all because, how do I formulate it? And it takes time to write it down. And of course, when I started, that was in a dinosaur time, when you didn't have any word processing, you had the typewriter. And cut and paste meant that you really take a pair of scissors, cut the paper, and then you cut the paper and put it in with a tape, paste it on the paper. And of course, that's so time consuming to do that. And it took time to really learn more about writing. Today, there's a different kind of story when cut and paste really is quite easy and you don't need to cut the paper. But also, already now think, who is my potential reader? Is it a practicing engineer? Or is it a researcher? Is it my colleague? Or is it somebody else? And also, when I do this work, is it of interest in another country? Or is it just interesting for my own environment? If I live in a cold climate, is it interesting to know about how melting snow is affecting my treatment in somebody from Malaysia or somebody from a tropical country? Well, already now I can think, is this of interest? Which kind of audience is it interesting for? And if I talk about, let's say, water treatment in a cold climate, well, I shouldn't expect that people from a tropical country would be interested, and the other way around. So think about that already now when you organize your thoughts. Who is the potential interested reader? And of course, all the time, you have to read high-level articles related to your research area. My suggestion is also that you try to see articles in, highly respected journals like Nature or maybe Water Research or something like that. That can give you some kind of introduction how to write a good paper. How do they present their figures? How do they present their tables? How do they present their introduction and tell why is this paper interesting? So try to all the time relate to high-level articles. Even if you shouldn't aim for publishing in Nature from the beginning, but they should be your role models. Think about that. But also read in other papers like Time magazine or similar magazines, because that helps you to really see how people present various results. So reading is very important. So again, I repeat to you, write something every day. So how do we get started? Well, I was taught at school to plan from the beginning and then write from page 1 to page 2, page 3. But as I said, you don't need to do that today. You put a puzzle together. You find something for materials and method. You find something that is interesting, an interesting figure, and so on and so forth. You put randomly pieces together before you have got a full structure of the paper. So you may switch between, doing a writing randomly or doing it, in a more planned way. And remember, the first draft is just for you. So don't worry too much about the details. Now, after you've done that, you can check with your friends and colleagues. So we have to have some order when we write. And I repeat again, why do I do this? Start with, the 5 lines in the introduction. What is the purpose of all of this? And before you have done the work, write the conclusion that you would like to see. What do I hope to find out a year from now? Because that is a very interesting presentation of your vision. write the conclusion before you can make a conclusion, if you understand me right. Because that helps you to focus on what needs to be done. What has to be done for me in order to motivate such a conclusion? That's the vision of the paper. Don't forget about that in the very beginning of your work. And of course, during the project, you write about materials and methods, and you make figures and tables, and you find experiments, and you have to repeat experiments and refine it, and so on and so forth. But also, start very early and write the first outline of a discussion. Is this surprising, or is it what I expected? And the discussion is coming also in pieces while you work with the material, while you work with the experiments or simulations or whatever. Is this actually what I expected, or have I already learned something? And that will be the first part of the discussion. And you go on like that. And the discussion is refined week by week or month by month. And that helps me to really find. So what I'm trying to say here is that you write small pieces of your paper all the time, even if it's not organized like a paper, but you have a file with discussions, you have a file with the introduction that you refine, you have a file with the conclusion. And in this way, you build it up like a building. And later on, you will put it together in a more systematic way to form the paper. And towards the end of the project, now you can write the abstract. Now you know what you have done. But also, you remember you had a first version of the introduction where you really stated, this is what I would like to do. Now, having done the work, you write an updated version of the introduction. But remember, the introduction should be there from the very beginning. And now it's time to refine the discussion. Now I know all the results. You had some ideas of the discussion and you refine it. So you see, you build up gradually the introduction, and you build up gradually the discussion and the conclusion and the key message. And now when you are finished, now you can think, is the title still valid? Can I refine it? Can I do that in order to have, a good message? So if I summarize, you gradually build up the introduction. You gradually build up the materials and methods, as well as the discussion. Don't start the discussion when you have got all the results. Start the discussion very early on in the work, because that helps you also to critically review the results that you have got in the materials and methods. So having done that, who is the author of the paper? If you have co-workers, discuss between you who should be on the author list. And we have different traditions, who should be the author. And, it's different in different disciplines, and it's different in different countries. But discuss with your co-workers who should be on the author list, who should be first author, who should be the last author. And this is different in different traditions. So this is something that you have to discuss. But remember that every co-author is responsible for the content. You cannot say, if you're a co-author, well, I just did one experiment and I'm not responsible for the rest. Well, you are. You're responsible for the whole content. But on the other hand, if somebody have read the proof only, they shouldn't be a co-author. They should be acknowledged in the acknowledgement, or a supplier of the material, or an advisor, or so on. And if you haven't done anything in writing the paper, you shouldn't be a co-author. And very often I've been asked, to be a co-author of a paper that I didn't contribute anything with. And I said, no, I shouldn't be a co-author, because some people would like to add people to the author list because they think, okay, maybe if I add this professor or something like that, maybe it's easier to get it published. And this is something I'll come back to you when we discuss, ethical issues. And again, the style of the paper is determined by the potential reader. So many people think, oh, I would like to publish, in a famous journal, Nature or Water Research or something like that. That's a wrong way of thinking. And also, if it's your first paper, you will probably have difficulties to publish directly in one of the famous journals. Examine which kind of journal you would like to publish in, because that determines the style of it. As I've said, who is the potential reader? And now we come to the title. The title decides, the direction of the paper. Should it be simple? Should it be complex? Well, how about this title? If you try to impress somebody, the effect of heating the albumen and vitellus of the Gallus domesticus containing calcium carbonate in H2O to 373 degrees Kelvin. Well, the point is how to boil a chicken egg in water. Many people are trying to make the title as complex as possible. That's not the point. Make it simple so people understand what is the message. Because many people are trying to impress by making the title complex. And I'll show you a couple of examples here, and you have to think about this very often. Make the title as short as possible, because think about how you scan over titles in a table of content. And if it's not sufficiently short, you skip it, because it's a title that sells the manuscript. And this should be describing the message of the paper. And remember, it's only one message, not two messages. If you have two messages, write two papers. And also place important words first in the title, because that's where you look first. If you start with a short introduction to, that's not the way to do it. Or a qualitative analysis of blah, blah, blah. No, the important word. What is the most important word? And no abbreviations or jargons. And sometimes, if the title may become too long, use a subtitle. Let's discuss that in a couple of titles here. Here's one title of a paper from Malaysia. Qualitative analysis of emerging micropollutants in Malaysian wastewater treatment plant system. And my first question is now, is this interesting for me living in a cold country? Okay. The second is qualitative analysis. Is that interesting? What is the most important words here? Well, emerging micropollutants, right? These are the most important words. So let's see, let's place them in the beginning. Well, now you see, I didn't do that immediately. I said qualitative analysis of emerging micropollutants. That's the message. And then I use a subtitle, Case Studies from Wastewater Treatment Plant System in a Tropical Country. Okay, can I do it a little bit better? So let's place the important words first. And these are emerging micropollutants, applying qualitative analysis in wastewater treatment. But again, you have to think, is my paper interesting for international audience? Is it, do I show, what is the message of the paper? That is emerging micropollutants. Then qualitative analysis, how I did it. That's not the main point. So, and probably you can do it much better. But you see, when you look at your title, try very many different ways of structuring the title and then test it with your colleagues and friends until you're satisfied. And the final version of the title may come after you have finished all the work. Take another one. Review of the development of the capacitive deionization for water sources with low total dissolved solids. Well, where do we find the important words? Review of the development is not important words, but probably deionization. So let's try review of capacitive deionization for low salt concentration in water sources. Then I made it a little bit shorter, right? But maybe I can improve it a little bit more. Capacitive deionization for low salinity water desalination, a comparative review. You see, now I've used the subtitle, a comparative review, because that's not the main point. The main point is capacitive deionization for low salinity water desalination. And of course, this is not the best title yet, but you see how we can reason to make the title look a little bit more attractive so that I can see very quickly what is all this about. So therefore, it's about capacitive deionization. And the review, well, that may come later on, a comparative review. So try several versions of your title before you are satisfied. Otherwise, people may get confused. They see the title and they skip it and go to the next paper. So to summarize about the title, make it as short as possible. The important words are first in the title, no abbreviation. And also, you may use a subtitle that helps you. Test different titles together with your colleagues and try to find out. Now you come to the abstract. And the abstract should stand alone. In other words, it's usually about 200 words. You should be able to read the abstract and both find about the problem and the conclusion. And remember that abstract is a selling point of the paper. And that's a selling point via search machine. Be brief, be specific. There is no figure, no reference in the abstract. So by reading the abstract, you should get the gut feeling for what the paper is all about, both the problem and the conclusions. And then we have the keywords. Well, think carefully about the keywords because they are part of the search for the paper. Be precise. Avoid, general keywords that wastewater treatment process or COD or risk or conservation or pollutant, something like that, because then you get 10,000 references. So use very specific keywords. And don't repeat words that you use in the title. Use other keywords that will complement the title so people can find your specific paper. And don't repeat words in the title and don't use general abbreviations that people would not understand. Maybe we can make a pause here because now we have 5 minutes and I will actually continue with language and style together with the introduction. So this is still part of lecture 2, but I will take this part of lecture 2 and lecture 3 for the next 30 or 25 minutes. So if it's okay that we make a 5-minute break here.
Thank you so much. Yes, we can make a 5 minutes break here. And I would like to encourage those on Zoom, and we're very happy to announce that we have reached 100 participants. Thank you so much for your kind participation. I can't see your country, but if you want to put your country down besides your name, like renaming, if you want to put Indonesia, Malaysia, Nepal, Japan, wherever you're from, or your university name, that is also helpful for us to track. Pakistan, thank you so much. So we are going for a break for 5 minutes, and we will resume at maybe 3:35, since it 3:35. 3:35. Now, I would like
Okay.
to encourage for any question,
Yes, please.
question on the chat box. Anybody? Or in the room here? Any question? Anybody has any title of manuscript draft that you want Gustaf to check for you? This is the moment. Please type in your title, and then you can ask Gustaf to check and we can discuss together. Any question at
Yes.
all?
And let me emphasize that you can send an email to me with the title and we can discuss it later or after the seminar.
Yes, yes. Gustaf will be sharing his email as well if you have anything to discuss with him also after the seminar. But
And
for now, if you have any question,
somebody is asking for attention.
Uh, Hi, Prof. Can you
I
hear me?
saw a hand raised.
Can you
yes,
hear me, Prof?
please proceed with your name and university name and your question. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Amalina, and I'm from National Institutes of Biotechnology, Malaysia. I have a question regarding the abstract. Should we in the abstract, should we detail, should we include all the results in the abstract, or should we just focus on the most important results in the abstract?
I think, considering the abstract has to be short, only 200 words, there's not space to show all the results. Basically, I would say, think in as the beginning of the introduction. Why are we doing this? What is the problem? That has to be there in the abstract. Then you can mention the key results, and also you can summarize the conclusions. There is not space for any details in the paper. So what I recommend you to do is to read abstracts of good papers and see what they write about. And that can guide you and give some kind of role model how to write an abstract.
Thank you. Does that answer your
Thank
question?
you. Yeah, thank you, Prof, very much.
Okay,
And then
thank you.
another question maybe on the method itself. So it's going to be the same, right? In the abstract, we should have one or two sentences about the methods we are using in the paper, right? And
Yeah, you can mention about the method you have been using, but as I said, there's not space enough to write about any details.
understood. Thank you very
Yeah.
much, Prof.
Thank you so much for your question. Okay, so I think we go for 5 minutes break from
Okay.
now until 3:35. If you have any more question, please note down in the chat box, and Gustaf will answer when we continue in 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Hi,
Thank you.
Gustaf.
Hello.
You're ready.
I am ready.
Okay, thank
Let
you.
me.
Right.
let-
Before you continue, I have also put the copied the registration link for all participants to fill in. This is very
Yes.
important, so we will have your email so that we can share with you the recorded lecture at a later date.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, and the email is coming on the slides as well.
I think there are two questions also, Gustaf. Just one second. Two
Okay.
questions on the chat box. This is from Nishta from Nepal, PhD student from Nepal. Could you
Yes.
share the healthy manuscripting routine? How to strategically pen out the writing routine for quality paper? Because with intensive energy put into writing, it wears you out and you enter the zone where you think you have done good work, but in no mental capacity to critically think about the quality of the manuscript because of sheer exertion. So she's asking about writing routine and keeping up with energy for writing.
Well, this is a very tricky situation because many people, I would say in many, many countries, uh, let's say PhD students never get, any instruction how to write a paper. They just do the work and then you have to report it. And the problem is now that it's not enough to simply document all that you have done because that doesn't qualify for a good paper. So I hope that what I tell you now can help. Let me also mention, Norhayati, I think you got a couple of files that we published at IWA, how to write a paper and how to write abstract. So maybe that can also be spread around to people. So I hope by this seminar that you can get some advice, but I find very many PhD students, they never got any instruction how to structure the paper. And one idea is, of course, to share your manuscript together with others. And you can sort of start with reviewing each other to see what do you mean with this, and what do you mean with this, and this sentence is not clear, and so on and so forth. So I think we can try to help each other by doing this.
Another question, Gustav.
Yes.
Should we write our research papers in a way that is easy to understand, taking into account people with no expertise at all for our topic?
Well, again, that depends on the audience. Who am I writing for? Because, and we have to determine that. Who is the potential reader? And if I'm writing let's say, a popular science paper, then I should avoid, certain terms, or I should avoid, let's say, equations or complex terms and so on and so forth. But let's say, to begin with, think about the reader is your PhD colleagues or something like that. But if you are sure that you will write the paper for a practicing engineer, you have to explain other things. So that I think the question is very relevant. We have all the time to think of who is the potential reader. And you can find that out if you think about publishing in a specific paper. Then you can see what kind of readership that paper has. And you can also look at the web page about what kind of papers do they accept, what kind of readers do they have. So study that journal presentation on the website. I think that's one advice I can give.
Thank you, Gustav. Over to you.
Okay. So let's see now that I can share the screen again. I'm trying to get back my PowerPoint here. Sorry. I see you on the screen and I don't see my own PowerPoint.
Gustav, maybe you stop sharing and then restart sharing again, please.
Yeah, now, here it is. Can you see it now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So when we talk about language, I mean, most of us have don't have English as our home tongue. And very often you can see people are trying to write too long sentences. Don't try to write a novel. Write short sentences. The point is that you shouldn't tell a story that looks like a novel. You should tell, something that the reader can see very clearly how this is actually seen. So writing clearly is really very, very important. And determine what you're trying to say. Say it in your own language first, and then trying to translate that into English if you're publishing in English, and most of us have to do that. And be brief and organize your thoughts. So the point is, writing clearly is more important than, writing a good story. And also try to avoid, words like very good, extremely good, highly, and so on. Very often again, I say very here. I try to look at my manuscript and see how many very's did I use, how many extremely did I use, and try to take them away. So a lot of this can be polished later on, but just say it, as short as possible, and look for what you didn't say. This is also, of course, important. And it's difficult to use different words for the same thing. So if you use word, for example, look for synonyms. Or if you have a thesaurus, look for synonyms. Instead of this word, can I use a similar word? And then, don't be ashamed of edit your manuscript. And I can recall, one chapter I wrote for a book. I rewrote it at least 8 times before I found it could really tell what I wanted to say. And use a spell checker if you have it, but don't trust it, because very often, it is changing words to something that you didn't know. For example, I recall once no was changed to not, and that will certainly change the whole message of the system. And use what I call active voice structure. We propose instead of it was proposed, or we demonstrate, it was demonstrated, and so on. It's much better to say directly, yes, active, not it was proposed that. That makes the language a little bit more clear. So all the time trying to be as clear and short sentences as possible. Also, this is a unique result. Well, don't say that, but say, as far as we know, this is a unique result. That's a different kind of tone in the same, because then nobody can criticize you of being, not saying the truth. And I have some words here that I propose. And if you're interested, you can look in the slides, but I include this without actually telling all the different words that I propose here. But if you're interested, you can look at the slides later on. Make it as simple as possible all the time in the text, because people appreciate a simple language where you can understand the message very easily. So I'll just leave these slides and you can come back to them later on. But be careful with the spell checker, and also that you don't have misspelled words, because once you see words misspelled, that takes away a little bit about the confidence in your paper. So at the same time, as I said, be very careful with the spell checking. I recall once the White House in Washington had a press statement called for peace in the Middle East instead of peace in the Middle East. And that's certainly a little bit different. And if the White House can come out with that, that takes away the confidence in the message that they were trying to convey. Also, you lose credibility. So please be very careful with the spelling that you use in your paper. People will judge you based on that. So now I come to the introduction of the paper. And as I said in the very beginning, the introduction is so important because that's where people decide if they wish to read the rest of the paper. So what should be included in the introduction? Well, early on, you should tell, why is this work important? Why did we do this work? What is the vision? In other words, early on in the introduction, you state the problem, the question to be addressed. We have looked at, influence of micropollutants in this river and blah, 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 blah. And then, of course, you tell very quickly what is the suggested solution to the problem. So this should be described. In other words, this is why did we do the work? Now, when you start your work, you sketch the introduction to clarify your thoughts. Why are we doing all of this? Write that introduction for yourself. And then you, during the work, can go back to the introduction and see, okay, this is what I actually thought about it. And after the whole paper is finished, you complete the introduction. So in the order of the introduction, you look at the purpose of the paper, why did we do it, and the research question to be asked. That has to be there as the first paragraph in the paper. And remember, as I said earlier, you have explained in 2 minutes for your friends, why are we doing this work? Why is it important? And so on. And that should be, penetrating the introduction as well. Then in the background, you should cite earlier work, literature review. If you write a PhD thesis, maybe the literature review should be a special chapter because it contains a lot. But in a paper to be published, then there's not enough space for too much of a literature review. On the other hand, as a reader, I would like to know, did you do your homework? Have you really checked out what has been done before? Because that creates a confidence in the work that you are doing. And finally, you have a suggested solution of the problem, a big picture of the results. In other words, we did this kind of experiments. We went out on a measurement campaign. We were building up a model for the simulation or whatever you did. So you give a big picture of the results. You describe, in other words, in 5 or 6 or 10 lines of the introduction, what did we actually do? And then you give an overview of the paper. First, we show the experiments we did, and we had the kind of measurement campaign and so on. And in section 4, we discussed the results, and we found the following main results. So the introduction gives an overview of the paper in a sense, with the why did we do that? You give a background, and then how you approached a proper solution to the problem. Well, in the literature review, it can be part of the introduction or a separate section, as I said. It gives the motivation for the research. And remember that don't repeat general knowledge. Again, we come back to the question, who is the reader? What kind of knowledge do I have to write here in order to interest the readers? And only publication that relate on the problems. Because again, we may ask, how many references should I have in the paper? Typically, never more than 25 references, unless it's a review paper that can contain more. In your PhD thesis, you might have hundreds of references. But again, only references that are relevant for your own problem. It's not a textbook. So just take the references that have a direct bearing of the problem. Very often people forget about old references. And, very often there may be references that are 20 or 30 years old, but still are relevant for the background of this paper. But also don't forget about references that are during the last 1 or 2 or 3 years. So when I see a paper, when I see references, both old and new references, I feel a little bit more confident. If I see references only from the last 2 years, I become a little bit suspicious. Didn't they do anything before, earlier than 2 years ago? So think about that. As a reader, I would like to see that you have done your homework. You have seen the old references, and some of them may be relevant, but you also are aware of the latest publications on the topic. So by reading the introduction, I will decide if I will continue to read the paper. So in other words, spend time on the introduction, because if you don't attract the reader after the introduction, it doesn't matter what you have done in the materials and methods. And give the abstract an introduction to a colleague or a friend, one who is not familiar with your work. What kind of questions do they state to you? And by doing that, you can have, it really makes sense to test it. Do you understand what's in it? Do you understand the introduction? Do I write the same background, the right background, and so on and so forth? All of this really makes sense if you ask a colleague or a friend. So by that, I think I'm happy to have questions, of course, and we'll see if you can if you manage to have any
There
question
is
now before
one question. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, there is one question from Amira Husna, Malaysia. How do you suggest balancing between clarity and technical depth in a scientific manuscript?
Well, technical depth, yes. When I say clarity, I mean the language itself. Uh, you know, if I see a sentence that, lasts for 3 or 4 lines in the paper, then it's becoming difficult to understand. So with clarity, I mean write short sentences and, try to make the language clear. The technical depth has to be there. Yes, definitely. But you have to explain the technical depth in a straightforward way. So test with your friends. Is this understandable if I explain my technical depth in this way?
Does that answer your question? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Gustaf. We have one question from the hall, please.
Yes.
Can I ask? Hi. Oh, is it? Hi, Prof.
We have,
I have.
oh, okay.
Oh,
Just one moment,
uh,
Nurul. We have one question
okay.
from the hall
Sure.
over here in Tokyo.
Okay.
Okay, Tokyo first, please. Sebentar, please.
Hello, Professor Gustaf. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Uh, so based on what you gave us in the lecture in the previous part, uh,
Yes.
you told us that start writing the introduction from what we're trying to do in our paper, then
Yes,
go into the background, and then go into the hypothesis. Now,
yes,
what I'm curious is that that's a little bit different on what I was taught here in my university. For context, I am a master student. So, what I was taught is that I should start with the background, so what other people did, and then uh, what is the gap from those previous research, and then give my thoughts, not my thoughts, and then give what I am trying to do in my own research in this paper that I'm writing. So that's what I've been taught in my lab, especially. So, what do you think about these differences on your method and the method that I was taught in here? I think that's my question. Thank you.
thank you. I'm very grateful for your question because this is so interesting. You know, very often people are taught exactly as you say, give the whole background, give the whole history, and then come here. What I'm suggesting, some people protest against that, but some people thank me. And the point is, if you read a newspaper, for example, a journalist, let's say there has been an accident on the road. They don't tell the whole history. Well, Mr. So and so, he went out from his garage and he went on the street, but actually he was very tired. So he wasn't really sure about that he could handle the car in the right way. And you tell the whole story until the accident happens, right? What does the journalist say? Well, an accident happened. And they tell about, that situation. And then they tell, why did it happen? You tell the background. And very often, it's the same thing in a conference presentation, very often, that people tell the whole background and then they have no time to tell about the real message because 15 minutes passes so quickly. So my suggestion is that, and many people try to do that nowadays, tell what is the message because and then you can tell the background and then when 15 minutes have gone, for example, in the conference, then you already have told what you wanted to say. And the same thing in the paper, and especially if I'm reading as a reviewer of the paper, most often I know the background. I know why, what has been done in this work. And I read a full page before I come to the place. What did you do? What did you do to produce this? So my suggestion is, and well, I'm afraid your supervisor may protest, but I'm still saying it, that give the message first. And then, this is what I've done, and this is the problem. And then you come with the why. Why is this important? Well, you have the whole background, you have the whole story. Because then early on, I can decide, is this interesting for me or not? So that's why, but I agree with you that some people don't agree with me. But I've tested this idea, giving the message first for many years, and people seem to adopt it, but not everybody. I cannot hear you. Are you saying your microphone is not on, Yati?
Hi, Gustav?
Yes.
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 Hi, okay. Thank you so much for the answer, and I think that fully explained to Zaki-san on his question. Now, can we invite Ms. Nurul to proceed with her question before we take a 5-minute break? Ms.
Okay.
Thank
Nurul?
you, Doctor.
Hi.
Thank you, Prof. Prof, I have two questions actually. One related to the title. For the title, should we use phrases that is descriptive, for example, mechanistic insight in ligand binding, or uh, something that is more specific, like simulation and docking of this protein and ligand, for example? And then the second question is more on the introduction. For the introduction, should we also discuss about the uh, technical parts of the work, or we should just focus on the background and then maybe the biological significance of the work. Uh, I hope the questions are clear. Thank you, Prof.
Well, thank you. I think in the introduction, you shouldn't give the details of how you did the work, because that's coming in materials and methods. So just showing, the vision, the hypothesis, and, the kind of results that you got. That's in the introduction. Don't explain how. That will come later on in the materials and methods. Then I didn't hear clearly the first question. Can you maybe repeat the first question? It had to do with the title, I think.
Yes, Prof. The first question is about the phrases that I should use in the title. Should it be very specific? For example, the work is on the stimulation of a protein and a ligand. Should it be very specific, like a stimulation of a protein with this specific ligand, or should it be something that is maybe uh something like a mechanistic binding insights into the mechanistic bindings of this protein and ligand?
Okay, I see what you mean. Well, it's hard to give a general question, but think about this. Uh, which words are the most important one that can describe what I've been doing? And then test it with your friends and try several examples. So it's difficult to say. The word simulation can be used, for example, but not necessarily. The word experiment can be used, and so on. But think like this: does it give me, as a reader, more information what the paper is all about? So you might try, 3, 4, 5, 6 different ways together with your friends, and then you very often can come together. So discuss it in a group, and together, I think you can find, the best way to get a good title.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you so much, Gustaf, and thank you, Ms. Nurul from University Putra, Malaysia. Thank you for joining us. Okay, we have one question in the chat box, but we want to allow for a 5-minute break. We will answer your question, Shantini, after the break. Is that okay?
Okay.
Should be okay, right? So we
Okay.
come back at 4:10, 16:10. Gustaf. Hi, Gustaf.
Hello.
Hi. Okay, so I hope that everybody is back. Thank you so much for all participants for staying with us for lecture 4. I think it is a steady and solid stream of over 100 participants up until now. So I'm sure that the students are very, very much engaged with your lecture, Gustav. And I have
Well,
heard
that's
from them that
encouraging.
they really enjoy it. It's very easy to understand and it covers topics that are important for them in writing papers. We have one question just now from the chat box. So we go there now
Yes.
from Shantini from UTM. Shantini, do you want to say the question yourself or you want me to read it? Are you there? So just making sure that they have come back from their break, Gustav.
Yes.
Yeah, for us to answer the question. Yeah, it's okay then. Okay, I'll proceed with the question. Gustav mentioned that we shouldn't cite only the recent papers, but also take from older ones to show that we did proper homework. However, UTM or probably some supervisors want us to focus on the recent 5 years papers and not the older ones, except for theories and models. What's your opinion on that, Gustav? Thank you.
Well, I think, of course, we should concentrate and actually be aware of what has been done, let's say, during the last 5 years or so. But very often you can see papers that people are not, don't seem to be aware of, that, results or background was given much earlier. So, the same kind of problem might have appeared, both 10 and 20 years ago. So, I think my recommendation is at least, making sure that you haven't missed any important reference from earlier work. Because some people think that, okay, it's enough if I sort of study papers from the last 5 years. And in my opinion, this is not enough because so much very often has been done, but can be improved or refined and so on and so forth. So my own experience is it's very nice to see at least some older paper that showing, of course, that is related to the current work.
Thank you, Gustaf. Dr. Rila, have question?
Okay, hello, Gustav. Thank you for your lecture. It's really, I think it's really important, especially for us scholars, who don't have enough time to, like clean our data and write our paper.
Thank you.
And then, like, my question is actually quite similar with the previous one, about like the usage of the like classic theories, like classic papers, because sometimes my reviewers often complain about this, like I didn't really cite like the updated reference and stuff. And also like one more question, because my research is more related to social science. Sometimes like I cannot really find like the like a journals or like a books that are related to my analysis. So sometimes we have to rely on the what is it, like newspapers and stuff. But then like the reviewers all say that you need to find like relevant publications, but I say that it's quite difficult because nobody has written about this. So like I really want to know, like, what do you think about this? How should I I don't want to say argue, but like try to convince my reviewers that the data is also worth to be explained. Thank you.
Oh, this is an interesting question and a very relevant question because many reviewers have a very narrow perspective, and I think often that's why it may be important, to spend time to explain why is it important, to combine a couple of different areas, for example, because you should remember that, well, also reviewers are human beings and they may not be able to have the right view of your paper. So that's why I think it's important either to have, an accompanying letter to the publication. This is trying, to combine, let's say, social sciences, as you say, with together with technology, or because some people are relating only to technology and are not interested in the other team. And I've experienced that kind of a dilemma also in some cases. So it makes it even more important, to explain in the beginning. It is important to combine the two areas. And then, of course, to find a suitable journal. Well, there are so many journals available today, and maybe it takes some time to really find the proper one. I agree with you. This is not easy, but don't give up. Don't give up. Because the combination of two areas is always very important.
Thank you, Gustaf. And I'm sure that answers Dr. Rila's question. And over to you, Gustaf, for the next session. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see now that I share the screen. My
Yeah, you need
overhead.
to stop and then probably reshare.
Yes, I might have to do this and this. Okay, can you see it now? Can you see my slide?
Yes, Gustaf.
Okay, good. So now I'm coming to materials and methods, and that's where you describe the details of the experiments or simulations or whatever you have. Now, first of all, when you write about materials and methods, remember that it should be possible to verify that you have done the work? In other words, do you give enough information for people to understand that your results are reliable? In other words, you have to describe the methods. And of course, we realize it's impossible to describe all the details. For example, how you prepared an experiment, how you prepared the samples for the experiment, or whatever it could be. But at least, you have to have a balance between brevity. In other words, you cannot describe every technical issue. And at the same time, the reader has to understand what happened. So sometimes I found, for example, commercial papers that they have used a specific apparatus or a specific method, but they didn't want to tell the details. And, they are secret about it. And then you don't trust the paper. On the other hand, how can you solve that dilemma that you cannot describe all the technical issues? Well, today we have good possibilities to describe the technical details on a web page or in an appendix, or in some journals allow, to have extra space for appendices showing the details of the experiments, for example. So that's very important to think about. How much can I describe? And if I describe this, does the reader feel that, I'm honest about what we have done? So this is about how you did it, not why, because why has been explained in the introduction. And first of all, don't start directly, we got the following results. Start with writing a few paragraphs in words. How did you approach the problem? What did we do in order to collect data, in order to build up a model, or whatever it is? Describe in words without too much technical details, so that the reader can understand how you proceed later on when you describe the details. So that is to prepare the reader to better understand the details of the experiments, simulations, or analysis methods. So be careful first. Think about, you would like to tell a good friend, what did I do? And first you describe a little bit about, in general terms, how you did it, before you come to the details of the description. So probably you might have done a lot of experiments, but not all the results may be relevant to the problem that you're trying to solve. So show only the interesting simulations or experiments. And also remember, again, the discussion will follow this. And all the experiments should be reflected in the discussions. So just select the most important experiments or the most important simulation results, or whatever it is. Then the rest can also be presented on a web page that is related to your paper, but not part of the paper. So first, as I said, describe qualitatively, in other words, in words, what you got. And then you can present the numbers in tables or in figures. And here I will warn you that so many people are misusing statistics. It's always good to look at the data before you make any kind of analysis. Try to find out qualitatively what the data tells you before you put them into a statistical software, for example. And the data should lead you to the discussion and conclusions. And I'll show you some misuse of statistics here. Furthermore, a figure, yes, you can a figure often says more than 1,000 words. But remember, you have spent time with what kind of figures you will show. The same thing with tables. Don't show a table that fills up a full space, a full page, showing just the most interesting details. Then the details, more details can be shown in the appendix. Only the key results should be shown in the table. And you have the supplement website or an appendix. Also check, is my paper going to be printed in black and white or in color? Many papers today are shown only digitally, and then you can use colors. But be sure that, you know, your colors are also possible to publish in black and white, if that is the case with your journal. And again, not too many details. It should be easily readable. And in the caption, don't show, you know, figure 22, simulation number 17. Instead, tell a little story. Don't be shy of having, you know, 2 or 3 lines below the table or the figure, showing what you're actually trying to describe. Well, don't make it complex. This is a figure from a paper that I've seen, and as you see, it makes you only confused. Try to tell what is the essential message here. Don't show all the complexity, because that will only confuse the reader, and you may stop reading here because it's getting too complex for you. Here is a table from a paper. And if you look at the figures here, for example, 4202 plus minus 20.73. That means that the number is somewhere between 20 and 60. And here he or she has given the numbers with 4 significant digits. In other words, they haven't understood what they did. Instead, write 42 plus minus 21. That makes sense, because then you can see that my number is not very accurate. Or instead of 1606 plus minus 15, I mean, this is a very uncertain number. 16 plus minus 15. That shows that probably the experiments are anywhere between 1 and 30. In other words, very uncertain. And I would say, is it worthwhile to show a number like that? And you can see here 4.35 instead of 4 plus minus 2. And here is a good number, 0.21 plus minus 0.05. That is believable. And you have other numbers that are completely unreasonable. So actually, when I am a reviewer, very often I start to look at the table. And if the table looks like this, where you have too many digits in the numbers, I send back the paper without having read the rest of the paper. Your table shows that you didn't understand what you did. You didn't understand the uncertainty in the numbers. I show you another example. The COD removal or BOD removal was, instead of were, 79.26%. This is completely unreasonable. You can never measure the COD or BOD with so good accuracy. So instead it should have been 79 makes sense, or 97 makes sense. In other words, be very careful with how many numbers or digits you present in your paper. Another thing is in the figure here. You looked at the left figure and you see the experimental results here with the blue dots. And then you say there is a correlation. Well, if I look at the data, I'm not sure if it is a correlation or not. I can see a trend towards slightly lower numbers, but you cannot make a straight line that explains how this data behaves. If you look at the right figure, you feel a little bit more confident. Yes, as time proceeds, I can see the increase in that concentration. So when you present something, make sure that your figure can inform about something. What would you inform about the left figure as compared to the right figure? So be careful with that. We have sometimes data quality talking about outliers. And an outlier, this is when you have some unreasonable number, missing data, for example, or data that is not valid. So make sure that you compare measurements. For example, if you have a flow rate and a concentration measurement, do they fix each other? Maybe it happened that they stopped the pump suddenly, and that changed the flow rate, and it didn't change the concentration. Or does a peak in one variable correspond to a peak in another variable? Because very often you can see the relationship between different variables. Some cases you can see negative concentrations in the data, and we know something is wrong here, or a zero value or missing value. So one very important thing is when you use statistics, be very careful, because people think they put in the data in a statistical package, assuming that the data is Gaussian distributed and normally distributed. Many data are not that, and then you cannot use statistics. And you cannot use statistics if you have only 5 to 10 data points. Then your data will be completely, your statistics will be completely wrong. Then it's better to look at all the data points, and then you can discuss something around that. Here, for example, there's some data of total suspended solids. And you can see here is an outlier. Suddenly there's a peak value that has nothing to do with the statistics, it has to do with the wrong signal. Or here, this may be something is happening in a pump is changing or something like that. But it doesn't tell the full story. And you see suddenly the value is shifting level here. So something happened here. Or in the lower figure, you also see a number of peaks here. They have nothing to do with the real value. They are called outliers. Well, in this case, suddenly missing value gives you, and if you try to make some kind of analysis of this data, you have to make sure that you remove the zero values. Otherwise, the data may become completely irrelevant. Here again, you see some outliers in the data of raw data. You have to take them away before you can do some analysis of the data. Here's one example of how you scale the presentation. You have two cases. If you look at the left figure, the removal rate was 94 in case one and 98% in the second one. If you present it with this scaling, you can see there's a clear difference in the removal rate. But if you present it in the right figure here, between 0 and 100%, you see there is very little difference between the 94 and the 98%. So when you have a diagram like this, think carefully about the scaling so you can get the message across. What am I trying to illustrate? Is it the difference between the two, or is it the similarity between the two? Scaling becomes important. So now you come to the discussion of the paper. And I said the discussion is the heart of the paper, because now you can make the results as a scientific contribution. You answer the question posed in the introduction. What was the vision? What was the hypothesis? Yes, we found the following. And the following results are surprising. These results are what we expect. So explain your results, because when you explain them and discuss them, that is what makes the paper interesting and makes the paper scientific. So think about that. It's not enough to just present the results. You have to explain them, if they are surprising or if they are not surprising. But still, the discussion is critical in your paper. And you edit, edit, edit. Don't be satisfied with the first or the second versions. Go back, go back, go back. And even if you're an experienced writer, you go back. And my own experience, I go back several times, not 2 or 3, maybe 4 or 5 or 6, before I feel confident that maybe this is now understandable. So don't hesitate to go back and review and review and review before you send it in. So think about now in the conclusion. The conclusion should be short, less than half a page, less than half a page. The conclusion doesn't have any reference. It doesn't have any discussion. Just state in a number of bullet points, we found this and this and this and this. No explanation, because the explanation has been done in the discussion or in the results. Here you just show this is what we found. It's like a number of headlines. And of course, the conclusion has to relate to the discussion, to the materials and methods and so on, but make the conclusion very short. That's the take-home message of the whole paper. So it's not an extension of the discussion. It's not a summary of your paper. No references it, but showing there may be some future implications that this leads to new problems that we have to solve in the future. So a good research, is trying to explain one thing and create 2 new problems, because that's what keeps us going as researchers. So don't claim that you have solved all the results, solved all the problems, but show, yes, we still have problems to solve. That is topic for future research. And revise. Ask colleagues to review before you submit the paper. And also find an experienced writer to check the language. And ask again your friend, who is not a specialist, is the introduction understandable? And revise again. Revise. Don't become satisfied the first time. And then when you go to the journal, you check the journal reference style when you write the references. You can refer to your own work, but not only to your own work. Typically 20, 25, 30 references. And the style of reference is different for different journals. So before you finalize the submission, check the style of the journal that you would like to submit to. And we already discussed, you have recent references as well as original references, at least one reference from the last 5 years, and they should be understood by an international audience. So if I make, 7 Swedish references, the reviewer wouldn't be very happy with me. They should be understood by an international audience, and they should be found when you search for them, retrievable. So with that, I think it's time to make a few minutes break again before we go to the editor's views. So I'm happy to answer if you have any questions by now.
Right. Any question from the floor?
Prof, I have a question.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Wait, Prof, I think I have.
Okay, please introduce yourself. Okay, on Zoom. Where are you calling from? Please.
Actually, my name is Amalina. I am from National Institute of Biotechnology Malaysia, and I'm also a student from UPMs. I have a question regarding the results. I often struggle to in describing the results. Sometimes I'm not sure whether the description is an interpretation of the results or just a description of the results. For example, if I see the value 1 and 2, can I already say in the results that, for example, sample A gives a higher value compared to sample B, or is it already uh, considered as a discussion? And another question is for the discussion part. I think I'm quite struggling in terms of how to focus only on discussing the results and use the literature as a, a evidence to support my argument and not sounding too literature review. That's my question.
Well, I hope I understood your question. My advice is when you have, tried experiments and so on and so forth, before you go to any analysis package or statistical package or anything like that, look at the data, the raw data, and discuss it with your friends and colleagues and supervisor and so on. And, before the sort of formal analysis, what can we see from this data? And try to, make your own qualitative evaluation of the data and say, okay, this is probably what we can see. After that, you can make a more formal analysis. But if you haven't done that kind of immediate informal analysis, it's very easy to misunderstand what you have got. And I've seen some cases where people have taken just the data, put it into a statistical package, and it becomes unreasonable. So think about that try to understand without any formal analysis first. And that will help you and guide you what kind of formal analysis you can make later on. I don't know if I managed to answer your question, but please tell me if I didn't.
Yes, Prof. That's exactly what I was asking. And maybe to be more specific, how do we, when I'm describing my results, can I already say, for example, I see a figure from two experiments, I already see two different figures. Can I already mention in the discussion that, for example, sample A is giving a higher values compared to sample B? Or is this considered as an interpretation of the results that should be in the discussion already? Is that clear, Prof?
Well, I think let's put it this way, the observations you make about the experiments or the sample and so on, that is part of the results. And you observe the data, it seems to be a negative trend, or it seems to be a positive trend, or there's a very wide variability in the data, and so on and so forth. That is part of the results. But when you come to the discussion, you may say, why was it so? Why was it so difficult to get a good accuracy of sample A, for example? So all your observations of the data should be in materials and methods, in the results. And then, in the discussion, you have the interpretation. Why was it so? Why did it behave like that? Did I answer your question properly now?
Yes, Prof. Thank you very much, Prof.
Okay.
Rijal Sensei have question.
Okay, thank you very much for Gustaf. So I have one question. I think it's quite similar to which just previous question. Maybe the student may be slightly confused. So, for example, when we present our result, so that's in many paper. So after methodology, they provide a section, big section like a result and discussion, right? And
Yes.
sometimes they provide a separate section, like a just maybe big section result. They present only result, and later on they provide a discussion section, right?
Okay.
I'm thinking like I like result and discussions sometime because like if I arrange the uh, result and discussion separately, so sometime I need to come back again in the result referring particular figure or particular table which already mentioned in the result section, right? So sometimes like when you are writing the like a result and discussion section, I'm just feeling it may be better to provide sometimes the same section. I mean, result and discussion section. Sometimes we can do the validation of the result. We can do the comparison with the other studies, and whether our result is okay or not.
Yeah.
Something like that, right? And in the next section, maybe I'm thinking it may be better to provide an overall discussion. So after doing the result and discussion, so as you mentioned, what is the key message want to say by doing the overall discussion, then it will not overlap to the, I mean, like if we make a result section and discussion section separately, sometimes when I go to result section, sorry, in discussion section, they are referring to the result section also, right? So I'm just feeling it's overlapping, and we have to go again in the result, right? So I don't know which method is correct. So do you have any idea for that?
Well, thank you. I really appreciate your comment because, uh, first of all, the first message is we have to distinguish what is a result and what is a discussion. And then, as you say, sometimes it's very favorable to put result and discussion in the same section. And the reason is that you might have very many different aspects of the results. And then, as you say, if you present, let's say 3 different kinds of results, and then you have to discuss them in a separate section, then it's better to take, aspect number 1, result discussion, and then aspect number 2, result discussion, and so on. So I like that. And so it depends on the actual situation. So we shouldn't be too dogmatic about it, how to do that. So sometimes it's very valuable to have results and discussion, as you mentioned, and maybe some kind of summary discussion, having the overall message. So as you say, sometimes it may be confusing because you have to go back and discuss which kind of result are we discussing now. And then, of course, it's better to put it together in result discussion, result discussion, result discussion, if I say so. So thank you for the comment. And the point is that the main message, I think, is that we should be very clear about what is a result and what is, then we have to take 2 steps back and see, okay, does it make sense, and all that kind of aspects of the discussion. So I appreciate very much your comment.
Thank you, Gustaf. To that, I think we deserve a 5 minutes break, Gustaf. So we will meet again at 4:50. 4:50.
50? Yes.
That's only 4 minutes, Sensei. It's okay? 4:50, 51, something like that. Yes.
Okay.
Gustaf. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Invite those who have not filled up the Google form registration, please do so. I will be sharing the form right now in the chat box for you to fill in. So we can contact you and share with you the online platform for sharing the lecture material later. Thank you. Hello, Gustaf.
Yes,
Yes, are we ready?
we are ready.
Next session, yes. I don't see any question in the chat box. If you have any questions, as usual, just like just now, please type in your question, or you can just switch on your microphone and ask Gustaf directly. Over to you, Gustaf.
Okay, thank you. Well, now I'm going to the other side of the table and looking at the paper from an editor's point of view or the journal point of view. And then, of course, we have to know what is a good paper.
Sorry, Gustaf,
And
are you sharing your slide already?
sorry,
Already, okay, okay, thank you.
is it okay?
Yes, it's okay.
Okay, thank you. So I'll mention something of the bibliometric measures, impact factor, and so on and so forth, and talk a few words about ethics. So, you know, why you present your paper makes your personality interesting. It's important to create the network, to meet colleagues, you share experiences, and so on. We talked about that already in the beginning. So there are two kinds of papers that we see. One are the traditional ones, research papers, interpreted accounts of findings, original research. And we also see review papers. Sometimes I've been asked by PhD students, they made a literature study, and which might be very good, but they ask, can I send this as a review paper? And my answer is usually no, it's not sufficient, because again, it's not enough to show all the work that has been done, but also have some kind of discussion with that kind of work. Typically, a review paper is written maybe with a team of, let's say, a PhD student and a supervisor, because the more senior researcher can give an interpretation of the previous publications. So I think what we should aim for here is mostly the traditional research papers. And remember, read the instruction for authors in the journal that you are aiming at. How the references are written, what is the length of the paper, how many pages or words and so on, the format of the paper, and instruction for the figures and how to make the submission. This is becoming more and more important since most now submissions are made online. So if you are not fitting the format, you get a very early rejection. And what is the editor and reviewer looking at? Okay, relevance. Does this paper fit into the scope of the journal? Because usually you should read about what is the journal trying to specialize at. And is there anything new about this? About the results, about how results were discussed, or so on and so forth. And clarity comes in here. Is it understandable language? In other words, and I come back to this, write short sentences and clearly, because I usually say our common language is, broken English. Very few of us probably today have English as our mother tongue. And that's why it's important to try to express ourselves clearly. And again, looking at the conclusions, are they interesting? Are they valid? Are they objective, And I look for the title, keywords, and abstract, and so on. That's what I'm looking for as a reviewer. And again, as I mentioned to you in the last lecture, I look at the tables. Do they make sense? I remember one case, a COD concentration was written with 7-digit accuracy. COD was something like 653.5467. And I wrote back to the author, you haven't understood what you did. Please correct. And then they can come back again with the paper. So I also see, does the paper tell a good story? Think about the paper as a story. We started with this kind of problem. This is how we approached it, and this is how we came to a conclusion. Look at it as a good story. And then again, is it interesting for an international audience? In other words, if I write something that is particular for tropical countries, it's probably not interesting for a cold country. On the other hand, it may be very interesting for, a number of tropical countries. So you should mention that maybe in the subtitle, experiences from a tropical country, and vice versa, experience from a cold country. And also, does it stimulate for important questions? And will people be interested in reading it? So that's what I'm looking for as a reviewer or editor. And also, it's driven, and again here, it's interesting if we have just a technical aspect, or do we have a combination of technical and sociological or economical or industrial? Again, this can be interesting depending on the kind of journal we have. Does it show a new scientific method, or maybe a new measurement method, or a new kind of environmental problem that hasn't been discussed before, and so on and so forth? And of course, are the scientific methods appropriate? Can I see, is it possible to reconstruct what they did? Can I understand how they did it? Or is it hidden away? And I mentioned about these kind of commercial papers that sometimes try to hide what they really did. Also, if you have only 5 references, I'm getting a little bit suspicious. If you have 50 references, it's probably too much. It doesn't fit into the paper. So again, only adequate references. Well, why do I wish to reject the paper? Well, it's insufficient information. It's too commercial. Maybe the English is too poor to be understood, or it's too short or too long. So I look, sorry for me, I have to drink a little bit. Probably I'm talking too much. Is the paper too short or too long? In other words, did the author try to look at the journal policy? Then, of course, again, is it interesting for an international audience? Is there a lack of discussion? Or are there too few or too many references? Or are there mostly self-references? I remember a paper where half of the references were self-references, and immediately you become a little bit suspicious as a reviewer. Did he really study that? So think about that. Then, when you collect data, well, often you should compare it with other experiences, because that will be shown in the discussion. Is the interpretation of the data or the data collection and so sufficiently interesting? If you just say, we did this, we got this result, it's not interesting from a research point of view. But if you interpret it, if you compare it with other results, then it's becoming much more interesting. What's made my contribution interesting? Yes, I compared with the previous results and we got this and this and this, and I can discuss the difference between it. Well, a basic rule in all publication is to be honest, to be fair, not fool around with data, no hiding, no falsification. That is to follow the rules, and all the time, if you're not sure, ask questions. The basic rule is all the time, be honest, because then people can trust you. Some people are trying, to fool the system. Now, very often, when you submit a paper, you have to sign the ethics statement for authors from that journal. So before your acceptance of you have to accept the principle on behalf of all the co-authors. You can confirm that you have informed all co-authors of these principles, and you are accepting them on their behalf. And when you sign that, you sign, yes, I want to follow the ethical rules. This is very important. And of course, you should verify that this is your work and nobody else's work. That all the co-authors have made contributions to the work, and they should be listed as co-authors. And nowadays also, the journal will send a mail to each one of the co-authors and ask them, are you really a co-author of this paper? Because it happens that people add a famous professor to the author list to make sure that they have an easier way to get it accepted. So remember that the journal will send back a mail asking, are you actually a co-author of this paper? And otherwise, they shouldn't be listed. They could be listed in the acknowledgement. They made contributions by proofreading or helping do experiments or whatever it is. So also, and I say you have approved the final version of the paper. This is also a question coming from the journal. And of course, if you submit the paper to one journal, you cannot submit the paper to another journal. This is not an ethical, then you don't follow the ethical rules. You can just submit a one publication at a time. If you get a rejection from the first journal, then you're free to submit to some other journal. But hopefully you should first revise to see why was my paper rejected before you go to another journal. And then, of course, you might have a conflict of interest. This is also important to declare, either in the acknowledgement or when you submit the paper. There is no conflict, economic conflict, or any other conflict that you are using somebody else's data without permission or whatever it could be. And all sources of financial support. So all of this is part of the ethic for authors. People might make multiple submissions. That's not a no. That is a no-no. Or they try to publish the same publication once more in a new journal. And I warn you, every week I get some email from some journal that I don't know, and they say, we have seen your interesting publication in this and that journal, and we will offer you to publish also in our journal. This happens more and more now. Publications is also, remember that, it's a business. And many non-serious journals, not so serious journals, are trying to make business, and they don't follow the ethical rules themselves. So be aware of that. People might offer you to submit a paper in their journal, a paper that has already been published. That is a no-no. Also, when we talk about plagiarism, that means I cite somebody without giving the source. I have one example a number of years ago where half the paper was a direct citation of another paper without giving the source of it. And this was discovered. Today, it's easy to discover. At that time, there was no software available that could discover plagiarism. But be aware of this. This can be checked very easily today. And concerning the authors, they put a new author to an old paper and publish the same thing again. And adding an author that was not involved, I mentioned that already, or even omit an author. He is my enemy, so I don't want to have him as my co-author, and so on and so forth. So there are several ways that people misuse the rules. And remember, direct citations of other papers can now be tested. And many of you are probably aware of that there is software available now that test if I've copied and pasted material from some other paper. So check this very carefully, that your text is original and not direct citation of somebody else's paper. And I'll just show you, there's a number of software packages available now in different countries where authorities, the university or the publisher, will test if your paper is original or not, or if the content is stolen from somebody else. Well, we also have bibliometric measures. Many people talk about the impact factor or the H index or other indicators. What is an impact factor? Well, journals say we have an impact factor of 5 or something. And it means the number of citations of all the papers in the journal divided by the total number of articles published in the same. In other words, if the impact factor is 5, that means articles, any article in that journal has been cited within the past 2 years and has been cited 5 times. In other words, it doesn't say anything about the quality of your paper. It says something about that papers in that journal are cited often. And then you should remember, what is the way to increase the impact factor? Well, if you have a very narrow specialty, then it's highly probable that the authors cite each other from that very narrow specialty. So if there is an impact factor of 10, you can suspect that this is a very narrow specialty. But if you try to reach practicing engineers, you might have a low impact factor because the engineers, they don't write papers, but they read them. So it doesn't say anything about the impact of your paper. So impact factor is in a sense, a very strange measure. And it should be only considered in context. So for example, impact factors in chemical engineers are different than impact factors in mechanical engineer, for example. They don't say the same thing. So never use the impact factor to assess the quality of the work of a person. Then with the H index, and suppose you have 15 publications. If 10 publications are cited at least 10 times by other researchers, then your H index is 10. If you are really publishing a lot and you have an H index of 40, that means that you have 40 publications that all of them are cited more than 40 times. And it takes a long time to achieve a 40. But look at these, for example. Author number 1, he has 4 publications that are cited more than 4 times. 51 times, the second one is cited 34 times, and so on. The second author has also H index of 4, but they are cited much less. Which is the best author? Well, the H index doesn't tell you that. It says that apparently author number 1 has written a few papers that are highly cited, and that may be interesting. So again, H index is not a complete indication of the quality of your work, but it might be an indicator at least. And this is a graphical representation of the H index, that the blue line shows how many publications do you have. It's a straight line. And here the first paper is cited 50 times. Let's say the paper number 5 is cited 32 times, and so on. And you come down to 17 here. That means 17 of the papers are cited more than 17 times. So the H index is 17. So that's a way to understand it. Well, then there are other indicators, and all of them say something about the prestige of the journal, but very seldom the rank or the quality of your own paper. It can say something about how quickly it got cited or how many years it gets cited. But again, it's all of these bibliometric measures are attempts to catch your paper in one number, and it can never be done like that. So be a little bit suspicious about these bibliometric measures, but they are citing very often. And many universities use the impact factor of your publication as a means to say that, okay, you need a certain amount of impact factor in order to get a higher salary, for example. This is a misunderstanding of the whole concept. So before you submit, review a review. Show the paper to colleagues, one knowing the area, that gives the technical feedback, and one to a non-specialist, reading the introduction, reading what you have achieved, and so that both can give an approval to the submission. And again, some final remarks. Why was the work done? What is the message? Is it interesting for an international reader? Check the language, the English language. Present the paper to colleagues before you submit it. And relevant references. And don't cheat. Don't try to follow the rules all the time. So if you do that, there is a high probability that you also can get the paper accepted. And don't be worried if you get reviews back and you have a number of comments. Be happy with the comments because that means that they have taken your paper seriously. They have actually tried to make the paper better. If they don't say anything and reject the paper, well, that's not a good sign. But if you get comments that it's not rejected, but you have a lot of critical comments, that's great, because then you know it's not rejected and they give me advice how to make the paper better. So hopefully that can give you some little guidance how to think in terms of submission of a paper. So maybe it's time for a break here.
Thank you, Gustaf. We have two questions, Gustaf, on the chat box. Maybe before we go for break, shall we take these two questions?
Okay.
Both is regarding reviewers. The first one, recently on multiple times at the time of reviewing manuscripts, I found that the manuscript has followed my published paper on the same topic, going through sections and subsections and methodology, but my published papers is not cited. So what do you think a reviewer should do in such a case? So this is a question from a reviewer. And then what I do is to report this to handling editor in the confidential reporting box. So is this a correct way to do it? And the frequency of such incidents has increased in recent times. So I think here we have Dr. Manoj, who wish to know your views on this, on the role of reviewer and what should they do if they found some cases like this. Please, Gustaf.
Oh, yes. I mean, you find unethical reviewers and you find unethical journals. Let's remember that. First of all, some reviewers take the chance to see that their papers are cited. I can recall one case where the reviewer wanted to have at least 3 papers cited by him. And these papers had nothing to do with the content of the paper. So what you should do in that case is to say politely that I see that you suggest I should take this paper, but I don't see that this paper that you suggest is sufficiently close to the content of my paper. So I think it's important to clearly state this kind of thing. Then you have other journals that don't accept the paper unless you have several references to their journal. And again, it might be the case that you should have a reference from that journal. But we discussed that quite often when I was editor-in-chief. Should we force people to, refer to articles in Water Science and Technology? No, that would be unethical. On the other hand, if we find that they should have made a reference to that article because it makes sense for the publication, that's a different story. But you find, and especially since there are coming so many new journals these days, you find unethical behavior both from reviewers and from journalists. So you should be aware of that. But also, don't keep silent, but be very polite and say, yes, I saw that suggestion, but I didn't find any article that was sufficiently relevant for my paper. They may not like it, but I think that's the only way to behave.
Thank you, Gustaf. So I hope that answers Mr. Manoj's question. And the second question is also on reviewer, but this is from the author perspective. So Prof, is it okay to refuse citing articles that are irrelevant to the work and demanded by the anonymous reviewer to be cited? So this is a case whereby the reviewer demand the author to cite his articles and the reviewer is anonymous.
This is very bad behavior of the reviewer. I mean, if the reviewer demands that paper should be cited, there should be a reason for it. And, as an author, it may not become very popular with the reviewer, but it's the only thing to say, okay, if you simply obey the reviewer and, the paper is not relevant, that will, make your paper less interesting or less lower the quality of the paper. So I think you should politely say, I cannot see why that paper should be cited. Can you give me some motivation why that paper should be cited or something like that, I
Thank
think
you,
all the
Gustaf.
time, it's important to be honest, even if it's not comfortable all the time.
Thank you, Gustaf. I also support that notion that reviewers and authors directly and also be honest. As you said just now, before submission, we should check everything, and your final remark is do not cheat when we submit a paper, and also
Yeah.
applies to reviewer when they review the author's submission. So thank you,
Yes.
Gustaf, and we shall go for our 5 minutes break, and we shall continue at 5:25. So it's now
Okay.
5:20, so 5:25.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Gustaf.
Yes, ready?
Anytime you're ready, Gustaf. I don't see any question. Maybe you can proceed to your lecture 6, and then I will
Okay.
check with the participants if there's any question. Over to you, Gustaf. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I would like to comment a little bit about presenting your paper, for example, at a conference, a workshop, or in a lecture. We discussed earlier, should I start with a background and telling the story leading up to my research problem and solution? And here again, I think it's very important to think about most often we have a very limited time to present what we have done, maybe 15 or 20 minutes. And then we should cover, what has been done in half a year or 1 year or something like that. In other words, we have time only to present the key issues. And over the last number of years, when I made presentations, I've started with the conclusions. Without any explanation, we found the following, blah, 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 blah. And then, as a listener, you say, why can you say so? And then you come with the explanation, you come with the background. And the point is, when the chairman of the session says, now you have only 1 minute left, I can stop and I got the message across. I don't have to show the conclusions and that I didn't get time for them. So start with the conclusions. And that leads to why did you do that? How did you do that? And then it depends on how much time you have. how many details you can show. But remember, don't try to show all the details. What is the purpose of your presentation? The purpose of the presentation is to make people curious to read your paper. In other words, when you present something in 15 or 20 minutes, it's a marketing of your paper. You try to sell it. And that's why you should not get into too many details, because there's simply no time and people cannot absorb it, because then people fall asleep. Instead, just show the key content, make people curious to read the full paper. So my recommendation is to start with the conclusions. Don't describe all the details, because there is simply not space for it. So, in other words, the purpose of the presentation is to motivate people to read the paper. It's a sales pitch, nothing else. So, when you present slides, well, not too many lines on one page. Many people can copy a full page of the report and you can read nothing about it. Max 10 or 5 to 10 lines. And if you know the room where you're going to present it, come early to that place. Make sure that you can read it from the back of the room. I prefer Arial as my font, as I'm using here, because it's a straightforward typo that anybody can read. And the size here I'm using is 28. And I don't want to use characters smaller than size 20. So in general, try to fill up the whole page so you can see as much as possible. Use figures instead of tables. Tables are difficult to read in a presentation. And never copy printed material that you have to be able to read every word. Think about using 2 minutes per slide. So only 10 slides in a 20-minute talk. Don't try to bring in 30 slides, because then you simply have to rush and people don't get attention any longer. I say here, use colors with care. Sorry. Think about, you need a big contrast. Well, I prefer to have a light background and dark letters, because when you have a dark background, it becomes dark in the room, and then some people may fall to sleep earlier. So try to use a light background that lights up the environment. That's my personal preference. Other people have other preferences, I know that. But test colors when you see. And also remember that the colors look different on your screen than they look in a projector sometimes. That's why it's very important to test the colors also with a projector. So you might have seen things like that, where you have a very poor contrast between the background and the letters, instead of this, right? So make sure that it's easily readable and that the fonts are sufficiently large. That is important to do that. Make it simple, not complex formula, showing just, the idea, not all the details, because the details are in the paper and you can refer to that. The point is to make people curious to read your paper, to make them motivated to do that. And practice with feedback. In other words, make your presentation for your colleagues and friends, and they give you feedback from friends, and they are usually honest if you're friends. And then you know how to improve that. And they can see if they, can see the numbers, if they understand what you're saying, how loudly you talk, and if you stand in front of the screen. Many people do that, as you know. So it's a matter of practice all the time, and practice a number of times among your friends before you make a presentation at a conference and presentation of your publication. And some hints. Try to speak slowly. Well, usually if we have English as not as a first language, it's okay. We can do that. But this is a problem very often with people from Great Britain or from the United States. They talk as if everybody was born in the US or born in Britain. So I'm trying, to tell people, speak slowly, and don't use too complex words. And never try to speak fast if you have little time, because then people lose interest as well. Speak slowly and make sure that you get the message early in the presentation. Conclusions first, and then you can speak slowly and you can stop at any time. And test if the diagrams make sense, if you are sufficiently clear, and how much time you need to making it clear. So again, it's a matter of revision all the time and testing several times. And don't expect the first presentation will be good. So test it among your friends and colleagues several times. And here's an important, who is the audience? Exactly as you talk about who is the reader of the paper. If you have an audience that are experts in this, you don't need to explain the background. They know it already. But if there is a more general audience who are not an expert, then it's different. And think about this. Very often, let's say in a large conference where you have many parallel sessions, then not all the people in the session are experts, maybe. So then you have to maybe explain a little bit more. But if you are in a specialized conference, you can assume that everybody already knows the background. So you don't have to explain too much of that, but instead concentrate on the results you got and what they can tell us. So think about carefully who is the reader as well as what is the expertise of the audience. And don't try to present what is written in a textbook. You can refer to, well, if you don't have the background, I recommend you to read this textbook, chapter so-and-so. That explains the background. You can say that, but don't try to repeat what is already in the textbook. Try to concentrate on your results. And concentrate on the relationship between, our hypothesis and our vision and the results. And avoid too much animation. I repeat that. Don't do like this when you present papers, because the first time might be funny, but the second and third time are really irritating. Make it, a clear animation and not with too much sophistication. Before you make a presentation, come early to the session. Come early so you know the room, you know where people sit, you know how large it is, and you test the microphone, test all the technicalities. So too often we see people fooling around with technical details that they don't know where the pointer is, they don't know where the microphone is, and so on and so forth. Familiarize yourself with the room, come early, and talk to the audience, not to the screen. And be enthusiastic. I have something interesting to tell you. Don't excuse yourself, but instead, I have something interesting to tell you. So that makes it much more fun listening to you. And start with a few concluding points again, and then respect the time limits. Practice, practice, practice. That's my advice. It doesn't come right the first time, maybe not the second time, But as you practice, you become better and better. And that applies both for the writing and for the presentation. Practice, practice, practice. When I was young, I really disliked very much to write. I didn't like it. But, you have to practice, and that helps you in the long run. So with that, I hope that you got some useful information. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to write an email to me and I'll try to answer. Maybe not the same day, but as soon as I can. And also, I will send a copy of my slides to Hayati, and you can ask her to get a copy of the slides if you wish to go back and see what I really said. And as I said, if I have not been clear, please let me know, and I'll try to explain a little bit more. So thank you very much for your patience listening, and you hopefully have some more questions to me.
Thank you very much, Gustaf. A round of applause to Gustaf from all around the world, I think. I had a look at the list of participants, and they have come from various universities, various countries and places. And the major percentage of how the participants today got to know about journal publication seminar hosted by Professor Rijal at TCU here is by word of mouth. So basically, they have been informed by their friends that this seminar is happening, and they have taken the opportunity to join from wherever they are. And I would like to thank all of the participants, the highest number being 111 participants today, and we have around 93 participants staying on up until now at the end of the workshop. So may I request everybody to please kindly, maybe if you want to turn on your video and show yourselves. And to that, we have no more question in the chat box unless anybody has anything burning in their heart that they wanted to ask Gustaf before I hand over the mic to Professor Rijal for some closing remarks. Anybody would like to ask any last question? If you haven't filled up the Google form, please do so we can contact you after this for materials of the seminar. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let us invite my sensei, Professor Rijal from Tokyo City University, Dean of Graduate School of Environment and Information Studies, to deliver his closing remarks. Please welcome, sensei.
Okay, so Professor Gustaf Olsson, so it's really thank you very much for giving a lecture for us. I think I have also learned quite a lot. So that one, maybe I would like to use for my to supervise to my students and my colleagues. I like to share the information. So it's really very nice to learn from you. And
Thank you.
today you have teach us how to write a title, abstract, introduction, methodology, right? And the discussion result, even about the journal editor side, reviewer side, also like from the how we need to present our finding, right? So I think it's a very, very useful information. So it's a thank you very much once again. And also, I think this kind of workshop is, I think, very, very important. So I don't know in other university, but when I start my research, when I did my master or PhD, so I didn't know this kind of the information. So this kind of the how to write a paper, right? So if I had known this kind of information, maybe I can do more efficiently. I just felt. So I think all the students and some of the friends, I think you can get the information from the Professor Gustaf, the lecture which he given today. I think it's a very, very useful to write your paper and to do your research. I think it's very, very important for your research career. So I think, as Professor said, so I think we need to revise our paper, edit, right? Revise, and the practice. I think that that's very, very important. So I hope we have learned so from him, and I would like to give thanks. Like to give thanks again to the Professor Gustaf. So really, thank you very much, and all the participants. So I like to give the thanks to all the participants. So I think it's very long hours, about more than 3 hours, right? Almost 3 hours. So thank you very much. And finally, I'd like to give thanks to my colleagues. So Norhayati, so Dr. Norhayati. So it is not possible without her support. So Sensei, thank you very much. So I think we have learned something new today. So I'd like to close this section. Thank you very much once again. Okay, bye-bye from Tokyo. So we are in Yokohama. So bye-bye from it's near from here.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye. Misan, so thank you so much for coming today. The journal publication seminar, right?
Thank you for the invitation. It's very informative and a good session.
Oh, really? Which part is you like today?
Like about the presentation part and also the abstract and also the detail. Like the discussion result.
It's section, right?
Yep, that's section.
I think when you write a conference paper, when in journal paper, I think it will be very helpful, because I think when I were doing master or PhD, I didn't know this information.
Seems good to me. I was like, why I know when I was I'm right now. I'm in the PhD, so I should know earlier during my master.
Yes. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay, so goodbye. Hello, so the workshop is it was very nice.
It was very nice.
So thank you so much, Sensei. And all the students. So I think we learned something. So we need to write good paper, right? Okay. Okay, bye.
All right.
Bye.